Policy Committee meeting. We have our full committee here today, and this meeting, the notice of this meeting was published at least 3 days prior. I don't believe, are there any announcements or communications today?
None at this time.
There were minutes from December that were circulated by Ms. Evans. If there's any corrections, we can let her know. Otherwise, those will go forward at the legislative meeting. So the first things we have today, obviously we missed the January 25th meeting due to the school district being closed due to inclement weather. So we have a couple of different things to get through today. First thing on the report is the policies proposed for second reading. These policies actually went to the full legislative session back in the beginning of January. Were approved for first reading. We kept them on the agenda in February as well for first reading. Are there any changes to the policies 815, 815.6? The proposed change, one of the proposed changes is to consolidate those and to change it to policy 817, or at least 815.6, excuse me. Are there any other changes? Otherwise, are we okay? Are we good to put those forward for second reading in March? Okay. So today we have a few policies for review. The first one we have is policy 123, student athletics. This is reviewing a specific section of the academic eligibility part. It's B1 and B2 in our packet. I believe the background I received is that there's conflict between our policy, what's actually written in our policy, and the district's practice. Dr. Wheeler, would you like to speak on that?
Yes, very, very quickly. We found that there was, when we did a crosswalk between board policy and the process that the high school has been using in academic eligibility, student eligibility for athletic competition, we found that there was a discrepancy. Our existing policy indicated that we were following the PIAA minimum standards for academic eligibility, which required a student to be passing 4 classes. What we are proposing to the board is that we revise the policy to require that students are passing all of their courses in order to maintain academic eligibility. Mr. Greiner and Mr. Schultz are both here if you would like one of them to address that. It is a minor change, but it is to bring us board policy-wise into alignment with established practice at the high school, with the recommendation from both the high school principal and the athletic director.
So, is there any questions on this policy?
Well, I would agree that we should change the policy to reflect what is practice in high school now.
I'd like to know what practices in our other districts. Is this typical that if they fail one class, they're not qualified, or?
The policy fluctuates from district to district because within the PIAA bylaws, there is a clause that does give the district freedom to create more stringent requirements for eligibility. Does that answer your question?
Well, doesn't.
I mean, there's other schools, you know, in conversations I had at meetings, there are other schools that follow the policy that we currently have been enforcing at the high school. There's other schools that also enforce the PIAA minimum.
So really, theoretically, we've been enforcing they have to pass everything.
Correct.
So if we don't change this policy, we're basically status quo, because that's what we've been doing.
That is correct.
we would either have to change our practice at the high school or remain out of compliance, out of alignment with board policy.
Right, so what's recommended is that we modify the board policy to be consistent with our past practice.
Yes.
Right.
Right.
Otherwise, we modify our practice to
To,
policy.
right, for policy.
Right, which we are currently doing until, hopefully it can get modified.
I guess that's a follow-up question would be is how many athletes do you think would be affected by the change of policy, if any? Or what type of
With-
effect would it have on our athletics program?
With the, following the minimum, well,
We've been doing we've been doing the 5.
yeah, with
We've been doing the 5.
with the minimum, like following just the passing of the 4 credits, that's the PIAA minimum. I don't think we've had anybody fit.
Well, the bottom line is what, Mr. Schultz, Mr. Grana, what you're recommending that we stick with the 5 passing grades, subject areas. Well, all courses. I should say, well, if they're taking more even, I guess. It's all courses.
Right. Most of the students are taking 6,
Yeah, that's
maybe
right.
7 credits. So they under this policy, they could be failing 2 to 3 classes and still be eligible to participate in athletics.
Right.
In looking how it's written, the proposed change is written, I guess I would propose to change the wording a little bit. So it's written, the proposed change right now is for academic eligibility for interscholastic activities requires that students must maintain a passing grade in each subject during each of the 4 grading periods. So are we requiring that, say they're playing basketball, if they failed a grade or failed a class in
In the fall.
the fall, exactly, and they're
the
not,
basketball's in the winter.
does that
That's where you go.
make them ineligible then? Would this, change in the policy make that ineligible? And if that's not what we're trying to do, then we just need to refine the policy a little bit.
Well, within the PIAA bylaws, there is a requirement of how many courses are passed at the end of the marking period going into a new semester. This is looking at, when we typically check, we are looking during the marking period, and usually, for the most part, we are only looking at one or maybe 2 classes. It's not like we have this huge problem with academics here at the high school. I would have to search to find the exact wording within the bylaws regarding that policy at the end of the marking period. But if you don't pass a certain number of credits, then it's a 15-day kind of like suspension or time that you have to sit out before you're allowed to regain your eligibility.
So, Mr. Greiner, are we saying that this would apply only to the marking period within which the team participation is occurring, or the entire year?
Or prior and the current.
Well, I guess what we're trying to get at is that when we do our weekly eligibility checks, right now we're looking for that particular class, and if they're on it for that week, then they have like a warning or a probationary period in which they're able to get that grade up to passing. If they're unable to do that after the week, then the next week we go to week 2, in which they're not allowed to participate in any games. They're still allowed to practice, but no games. And then we once again look, if they're still failing that same class for a 3rd week, then they're not allowed to practice or participate in the games. And that's what we've currently been enforcing, I guess even back when Ms. Donnell was the athletic director.
And Mr. Roos, we have to make this consistent with what I'm not sure they're saying yet.
Here's what the rule says.
I don't know. I think your mic's not on, or you talk right into it.
No, it's on. there a button?
Is there a button on yours?
Okay, how's this? Better? The rule states, and it's written to a student, you must be passing at least 4 full credit subjects or the equivalent as of each Friday during a grading period. If you fail to meet this requirement, you'll lose your eligibility from the immediately following Sunday through the Saturday immediately following the next Friday, as of which you meet this requirement. You must have passed at least 4 full credit subjects or the equivalent during the previous grading period, except that eligibility for the first grading period is based on your final grades for the preceding school year. If you fail to meet this requirement, you will lose your eligibility for at least 15 or 10 school days of the next grading period, beginning on the first day that report cards are issued. If your school has 4 grading periods, you'll be eligible for 15 days. If your school has 6, you'll be eligible for 10. So what I think I'm hearing is we simply need to change that to say you must be passing at least 4 full credit subjects and not failing any. And then everything else is the same. Isn't the high school proposed rule the same as the PA rule, except that in addition to passing at least 4 full credit subjects, you can't be failing any?
It's passing all of them.
Yes.
Okay, well, that I would just take their language, move it into the policy, and add the,
Yes.
yeah. Or we simply say we pass the PA requirements, we say in the policy,
Yes.
we go with the PA requirements, however, no student who is not passing a subject is eligible. So it's PIA plus. And then the reg will repeat PIA qualifications with the no failing, so that anybody looking at the reg will know exactly what they need to do. Does that make sense?
Yes.
It does.
Yep.
So would you like us to bring this for first reading with that language, or do you want it to come back to committee? To be honest, I think we are interested in moving this forward as quickly as we can. So if the committee agrees, we will take that new language and bring it for first reading on March 14th.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. So pretty much, just as Ken said, the proposed modification is having most of the same language that was in our current policy, with the additional phrase of including that, however, all subjects must be passed.
No failing.
No failing grades. And then we will bring forward the regulation, accompanying regulation of 123 at the next policy committee meeting, where we'll see the similar change made in that regulation, so then it can go up with second reading with policy 123. So,
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you.
that works. All right, since since we do have Mr. Greiner and Mr. Schultz here, with Mr. Schultz, I would like to, on the agenda, move up the policy 214, computing grade point average, since that's something I'm sure that Mr. Schultz would like to speak on, or at least listen to what we're saying. So 214, this is F1 to F3 in our packets. I believe this was something that came out of the Education Committee. Is that correct? Would you like to speak on this, Mr. Schultz?
Sure, I'd be happy to.
Thank you.
Thank you. And as per your last comment, this was first discussed at the Program of Studies presentation to the Education Committee meeting. At that time, we presented a proposal to change our current grading system from whole letter grades to one which includes plus and minuses. It was stated at that time that pending board, I guess the word's not approval, but pending board support at the Education Committee level, we would then make sure that we had conversations with students and with parents. So those conversations, to some degree, have taken place. We had 2 enhancements where we invited students. We had a luncheon with SGA, Student Government Association representatives, where we discussed the proposal with students. And at our last PTO meeting, the presentation was given to parents to make sure that we got input there as well. I believe that subsequent to that presentation, there have also been some extenuating conversations in the community and on social media about this particular proposal. The purpose for the change primarily is to increase student motivation. We currently have a system where if a student gets an 80 or gets an 89.4, that student receives the same letter grade and the same weighted grade. We believe that by differentiating an 80 to an 82 becoming a B minus, an 83 to an 86 becoming a B, and an 87 to an 89 becoming a B plus, that students will take a longer and harder look at their numerical average, and especially in the last marking period and on the final exam, will have more motivation in that course to bring up their grade and continue to maintain a certain level of mastery and effort. We also wanted to be consistent from the 6th grade to senior year in college experience that most of our students go through. At Sandia Run, we have a plus or minus system. Most colleges and universities have a plus or minus system, so we wanted 9th through 12th grade to be similar and thus bring consistency for the student. So if you look at policy 214 in the proposal, I believe that in a chart form, everything I just described is laid out. A through F, 4.0 through 0.0, and then if you get a minus on your grade as opposed to a 4.0, it'd be a 3.7. If you get a plus on your grade, it's an additional 0.3, so instead of a 3.0, you would get a 3.3. Happy to take
The
questions.
numbers, you were saying an 80 to an 80, whatever, that's not in here.
That is not in the current policy. That is detailed in the student handbook, at least it currently is. We could add it to this if you're asking me to.
I don't know. I mean,
Do we have a regulation to go along with 214, do you know, Ken?
Not currently, but that's why I think the explanation should go in the regulation. Whatever's in the handbook that isn't in the policy should be in the regulation.
Okay.
I can agree on that. And this, again, this only pertains to the high school.
Right, this year.
We should consider changing the policy title as treating Upper Dublin High School grade.
Okay. So, you spoke, this is consistent with how we currently grade our middle school students. This is how most kids are graded when they go on to college. This is something that you've spoken to students, a couple opportunities with parents. Obviously, this is something, if the board considers it, will be spoken at least 2 meetings, board legislative meetings. So the numbers that we see in front of us for an A minus, a 3.7, are all these numbers, or how the weights of the grades, is that consistent with how other schools are assigning an A minus or a B plus?
For those schools that do use plus or minuses, it's fairly consistent. You might see like a 3.667 as opposed to a 3.7, but it's definitely going to be in that ballpark.
I have a question for the administration. Would it be difficult to not remove the language or add the language of the high school, but to make it consistent that this is how we would compute grade point average for the middle school and the high school together?
Can I suggest if you're going to do that, then have policy have one section on the high school and then a second section on the middle school. You can have it all in one policy, but differentiate. Don't try to put a square peg in a round hole. And then you could take out that name change I just suggested. But you have one section for the high school, one section for the middle school. and I'm looking, I was actually looking right now to see if there was a policy in the middle school, and I don't believe there is a separate.
Okay.
If I may, I don't believe the middle school has a grade point average, which might be part of the difference in the language there.
Yeah. All right. Anybody have questions about this here? Anybody?
Yeah, Mr. Schultz, the other, this is a thought that I had brought to the education committee as well, but the two things that we are kind of discussing here, one is motivation and the consistency factor. On the motivation factor, the suggestion of an idea where, in my undergraduate studies, if you had an A+, it wasn't weighted to be a 4.3 or a 5.3 for that matter, but there was still a kind of a motivation piece to say you could get, be exceptional, receive that as a mark, it wouldn't affect your GPA in any way, shape, or form. I guess, what are your thoughts in regards to allowing that to be part of the policy as well?
Essentially just a distinction on a transcript. I have the same thing in college as well.
The conversations at the staff level have usually gone to, well, let's take a look at what most universities and colleges are doing. I think the majority do not have a plus. If you remain in the context of the two reasons for why we're bringing this forward, one is motivation, and you just provided pretty good rationale for that. The other would be consistency with the middle school. Middle school currently has an A+. The middle school has had conversations about eliminating the A+. Without passing the buck by any stretch of the imagination, I would like to loop them into that conversation and remain consistent. I don't feel terribly strongly one way or the other. I don't know if that's something I should be saying on the podium or not, but I don't. I see the motivating factor, and if that's really what we're about, a student with a 96 would want to continue to be engaged and trying as hard as he or she can. Maybe A+ in the transcript allows for that. So I certainly get that rationale. I don't want there to ever be an appearance to a college which is receiving our transcript that we're inflating anything. I don't know if an A+ in the high school transcript does that or not. I wouldn't mind taking a look at what if other local high schools do the same thing. But in the spirit of where you're coming from with that suggestion, I like that a lot.
What was the breakdown again of an A for the numbers wise? I mean, what's an A-, what's an A?
An A is a 90 to a 92. I'm sorry. An A- is a 90 to a 92. An A is a 93 to a 96. An A+, if we were to have one, would be a 97 to a 100.
Okay, so under the current, what's the current proposal? It's a 93 to 100 is an A. Okay.
Correct. One other point to be made, and may or may not play into the admin regs. The whole issue of rounding versus truncating is eliminated by this new grading scale. If eSchool will determine the numerical average to the nearest hundredth, that value will be rounded to the nearest whole number as opposed to truncating, and then that numerical value will drive what is the letter that shows up on the transcript. At the end of the 4 marking periods and at the end of the final exam, the 4 marking period averages taken out again to hundredths. The average of the midterm and final exam taken out to hundredths. Those 5 values will be averaged, will be computed to the nearest hundredth, will be rounded to the nearest whole number, and that will result in a letter grade. That kind of makes sense, right? Very good.
That would be all spelled out in the student handbook.
That's correct.
Can I ask, committee done,
Sorry, what?
or is the committee done asking questions?
Do you have any questions, Nina?
Okay, on the AEA form, against educational advice.
AEA.
Yes, AEA form.
NEA is something different, I think.
Yeah, we reference a WP and a WF. Is that not consistent with this?
No, that's a great catch. The one other addition at the bottom of the chart is getting rid of WF, WP, and moving to WD.
Right.
Currently, if a student withdraws from a class and is passing that class, there is no impact on the grade point average. If the student withdraws from that class and is failing that class, a 0 is averaged in on the grade point average. We don't believe that that is a practice that we want to continue, so as opposed to having a WF or WP. And by the way, we don't get very many of those, but in the rare occurrence, we believe it should show up on the transcript as a WD, and it should have no impact on the grade point average.
So we need to update the ADA form.
AEA.
AEA. Right?
Correct.
To reflect that it's a WD in both cases, at the end of the agreement. Good, well, I strongly support that, I think.
Well, thank you for pointing that out, that's important.
Did not like the WF, because there could be failing, that's why they're moving down and, okay.
Okay, so what I see what we want to do on this is that before we're ready to go forward to even take this policy to the full board, first we need to have a conversation with the middle school to see if we should put the middle school's grade point average in this policy as well, making it a separate section, and also having the discussion about the A+. And then at the same time, start preparing the regulation, administrative regulation, to include the information that's in the student handbook. Is that everyone else's understanding as well, or? Okay, so my recommendation is to bring policy 214 back to our next policy committee meeting. So we have enough time to have that discussion with the middle school and have the edits into this policy, or proposed edits to include the middle school, and whether we want to have add that A+ in for the high school, or if we're potentially eliminating an A+ in the middle school. Okay?
And Ms. Ward can just update the form,
She sure can.
the AEA.
And this would be applying for next year, right? I mean, we're not looking at something that would be applying this at the end of this school year. We're looking to start this in the fall.
It would start in September 2016-17.
Right.
It would start for all students in the high school that year.
Right.
This is not something that we can roll in. The e-school won't allow us to do that. So for students who have been in the high school for 1, 2, or 3 years, they will have prior years where their grade point average was calculated based on what I'll call whole letter grades, and they will have next year grade point average based on pluses or minuses. That will be explained in our, it's not called a transcript, in the documentation that we send to all colleges and universities. The name's escaping me right now.
School profile.
Profile, thank you very much. It will be explained there.
In order though to get this in, we need to get this in time for the handbook to be printed. When is the handbook get printed?
It's in the program of studies right now as a proposal.
Which is electronic.
Okay, so when does it need to be passed by the board in order to make it into the handbook?
We can make the update as soon as the board approves it, as long as it is in place. I would think before September, we'd be okay. Obviously, the sooner the better.
You don't
We've
print
been
it.
communicating it as a proposal, and it's the direction we believe we're headed.
Okay. So,
I want to get jammed up.
right, so if we can get this done by the end of this school year, we should be in good shape. All right, so going back to the agenda, we can go back to the social media and the acceptable use policies. This is number 2 under the agenda, proposed new administrative regulation, 815 acceptable use. We've put most of the meat of the old 815 policy now into the regulation with fairly massive updates to include our new technology. And this is going to be C1, C17's 815 in our packets.
and just, I know it says it, but the redlining is, it's administrative regulation. The redlining is against old policy language. There was no reg.
Right.
Oh, we already said that.
I think we've discussed this at a few policy meetings at this point, where obviously we've had our director of technology here who's been helpful with giving us direction on this. I'm not sure if there's, I mean, this looks like we've updated now from our last discussions at our last policy meeting. Does anyone have any comments about this, or do we just need a few minutes to review it once again?
Actually don't think this has changed.
I did.
December.
Right, I don't think we've
Yeah.
made any changes, right?
No, there are changes there.
I was comparing it to mine too. The only note that I had from our December discussion was adding some type of language dealing with cloud.
Which policy?
So this would have been to 815.
Road certificates.
Yeah, 815, the second page of it. Yeah, I'm looking at my one from December, so everything's. Yeah, I think that was the only, it looks like, the paragraph that starts as the second paragraph from the bottom on page C2. The UDNS will not warrant that. I think it should be the, actually. UDNS will not warrant that functions or the functions of the system. That the functions of the system will meet any specific requirement. You add a the in there. It was just that in our last meeting, I think we talked about in that sentence, putting something in about cloud. That's my note.
I don't remember, I'm just trying to remember what it is we wanted about the cloud.
If I recall, it's on the section of word, including the loss of data, information, or anything else, because it's not necessary within our systems or network, but because, let's say, for example, it's on the Google Drive, and it's in a cloud-based system that's outside of our specific network system, that our policy would include language to cover that we're not liable for that loss of
Yeah,
data.
the system.
I
the
believe it
network
was
will-
after the word network, we would add and the cloud, and through the cloud, or in the cloud.
Oh, I see.
Access or use the system or network. Or the cloud. I'm not sure if there's a better technical term. looks like the only change that I had seen that
How
had been
about
suggested.
just the system or network, or the internet as a whole?
Technical route.
I don't know, I'm just going back to the language that Phil recommended.
Well, not to be so specific, I think the network is also partly, it could be computer to computer, not necessarily accessing the internet. And so therefore, I think you need to have the network services as well as covering, that would be my assumption, that there's a distinction there.
So what do you think the language?
Okay.
I think
How
UDNS
about
and
the
cloud
public-
services.
How about the public internet or private district network? So to use this, you'll access to use the district system or district network or the public internet.
I think so, but then also going down to the loss of data piece, and I think that's the other part of it, where, for example, students are keeping their essays and such on a cloud-based storage network, and we're not maintaining that as well. And we're not liable or responsible for such things.
Yeah, the last sentence of that paragraph, is that what you're saying?
But I think if we're, as long as that initial language that we're adding is covering that, then I think we're okay.
Okay, I'll double check it to make sure, and I'll run it by Phil.
Okay, all right, so I think that's the only other change. So with that change, I think we should put forward the administrative regulation for the March legislative session so it can accompany 815, the policy for the second reading and adoption of policy 815. Are we all good with that? Great. Okay, so then, sister, regulation, the new 817 or old 815.6. Again, we're looking at the regulation as the new policy has been brought forward as a first reading already. The title of it it says 817-1. We don't want it to be -1, right? It's just 817.
Yeah, that should be it.
Okay. Again, this was something that we took from the old policy because we didn't have. This is from the old policy on social media. And I don't think we had any proposed changes from the last committee meeting. Do we have any suggestions, edits going forward for regulation 817 social media?
Just a quick question on D2 and the web-based internet tools. I thought we had tried to shore up the language there where it says, but not limited to wiki spaces, teacher pages, etc. Only because of the fact that there's such an ongoing plethora of different types of venues. But we tried to capture some kind of language that would just encompass all of that. Do you remember, Mr. Rice?
I actually don't, but it does say online applications involving any type of two-way communication, including but not limited to. So we're not limiting it to these, we're just.
I just wonder,
we can
yeah.
get it right at the moment.
I'm just wondering if there's any sense in putting those then because of that. For example, at Modo, I don't even know anyone that would use that right now.
That's a judgment call. If we're policy, I would agree with you. Policies should just let it change. Regs, you can add words, take out words fairly easily. So I'll defer to somebody that actually knows what the Modo is, which I do. So what it is, if he uses it anymore, ever used it, or
I think if we can just concise the language a little bit and then move some of that to the regulations.
This is
that's all.
This is the
This is
regulation.
Okay, never mind.
and blogs should probably be web blogs.
Okay.
Yeah, well, it's capitalized.
No, it shouldn't be. It should just say which it should be web blogs for the small. Take out it.
Yeah.
That sounds proprietary.
Yep.
Well, I think our old 815.6 regulation, it's in here. I can find it.
So these are all in the policy. Well, they're currently in the policy.
Yeah, this is the current
Which was
policy.
adopted in 2012.
Right.
So they're probably some that are probably already obsolete.
Because I think, looking at our policy, I'm not sure if we have it in this packet. I have my packet from December. Because one of the things that was social media, it was defining social media. I'm trying to see if that's consistent with the new policy, 817 policy. Where is 817? Well, I guess this is the policy. It defines social media, refers to forms of electronic communication such as blogs, wiki spaces, web pages, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter. Yeah, right. So we're pretty, we do what we can, I guess, to be as encompassing as possible since this stuff changes so frequently. But yeah, I guess, I mean, it makes sense to make it general possible. It's nice to have cite some examples so people know what we're talking about. I think, yeah, having the language including but not limited to gives us enough specificity so people understand what it's referring to. But yeah, the things that are obsolete, like Edmodo, we can probably remove since. Okay. Is there anything else on 817? No? All right, so 817, regulation is going forward. I'm sorry, with those changes, that's our, need a few more minutes, Ken. Are you okay?
So do we want to, in 817 policy, do we want to take out the examples in the parentheses then? Or leave them in?
I think it makes sense to leave them in, again, just so, I mean, like such as, I think it just gives people,
All right. Okay.
those who may have less technical knowledge than I do even, really understand what we're referring to. Yeah, this is,
My only suggestion maybe for the policy at 17 is to add that language though, of, but not limited to these examples, and because it's not there at present, right?
Right, we use the words, it's such as.
Yeah, and so the same language that we have in the regulation, add that to the policy as well.
Is that,
The regulation basically contains the language, so.
It's fine, just like, say, for example, or we not, it doesn't matter.
is it a material change if we take out the word such as to say?
Replace it with,
oh,
for example. Replace it with, for example.
like-
Including but not limited to. Instead of the word such as.
I mean, I see them as analogous, but, you
Yeah,
know.
simply semantic and not necessary.
Right.
I like, the only reason I like, for example, better is because you say including, it could be including something that's not something.
Okay. So do you like, for example, better than such as?
I would say, such as or for example, whichever. And I would make it, again, web blogs, wiki spaces, in web pages are small w for small.
Oh, can you talk closer to the mic,
I'm
Ken?
sorry, wiki spaces and web pages are small w. The other ones are correct.
Okay,
No, it's not.
okay. So what do you like better, Ron? For example, or such as?
No preference. We can leave it such as.
All right. So leave it as such as, we'll make the slight changes and using a lowercase versus a capital letter.
Okay.
Okay. All right, so that is, like, policy 817 and then the accompanying regulation. So 817 moves forward, as we said before, for second reading and adoption on our March legislative meeting. And now regulation 817 will accompany it for approval. Okay. Okay, so next on our agenda, we have policy 206, assignment to schools within district, which is E1 in our packet.
I'm just requesting the board add additional language to align our practice with policy. Currently, the practice, the longstanding practice, I understand, is when parents seek placement of their student at a different elementary school than their home school, we tend to grant that as long as there is room in the receiving school. But our practice that is not cited in the policy has been that if consent is granted, parents will be responsible for the transportation. So I would like to add that to the language.
Well, that's fine, as far as you would say parents, guardians.
Right.
Parents, guardians, correct.
We currently have a practice that children from North Hills can select either Jarretttown or Fitz.
But that would be
Do we
considered
currently bus them to either building?
Yes.
Yes,
Okay, so would this would not apply to them?
because that's considered their.
That would be their home school. They would not be
Okay,
asking
so they
me-
can select their homes?
Correct, correct. This is when, as sometimes happens, families move within the township. This is when most often this occurs. A family moves within the township and they'd like their youngster to stay at the first elementary school for another year or two. And we're happy to comply, but our practice has been that in that case, because we don't have a bus running from their new home to the first elementary school, we ask them to provide transportation.
Is that okay, Ken?
Yeah, that's all fine. I'm just, perhaps you should also want to add something about that parental request may be denied if it may be agreeing to the request would throw off class size targets. You might want to have something in there that gives you an out so that somebody doesn't use this to throw off your class size target. There's a lot of other districts that are having issues with this right now.
Okay.
That are changing this basically. There's some districts that are introducing the extreme concept, more extreme concept of partner schools. So you're not there. So, but you may want to put some language in it that says we're not going to grant these requests at this time for classes start.
Can you recommend some language for
Sure.
us? Okay, thank you.
And then the other suggestion I would have is our attendance areas should be in reg, should be delineated someplace in the reg. I would make that 206, AR 206 dash.
We don't have that anywhere, our boundaries.
You don't have,
No, I mean, yeah, we don't have our catchments anywhere in policy or regulations.
correct.
So will
Attendance
you-
areas,
Will you draft language for that as well?
I can be happy to draft the regulation, I'm going to need somebody else to get the,
Boundaries.
the attendance areas.
Right.
And the shelter too.
I think Brenda's office can do that based on transportation.
Or it could just be a map even.
Right, and I think that's what we have, so, I think that we have it on our website, and I think the township has it on their website as well,
Yeah,
so.
I know it's there, I just didn't.
Right, that will
It should be.
keep a feel, a real copy, yeah. Okay, and I guess at the same time, we can clean up 206, since we have, we have a new format, essentially, we can get rid of the left column.
So do we have an AR now? Associated 206? We do, okay.
Not,
Okay.
There's something about, to look at it, it's about me also, something that covers multiple orders.
Multiple what?
Multiple orders due to making control and things like that. In terms of, there's laws about that. I
Okay.
haven't covered in here, but I'll double check that.
Okay.
So I may be coming back to the 206 dash 2.
So you want us to bring this back to committee?
This doesn't need to be brought back to the
Okay.
but
The regulations.
you'll see regulations with this, within the next month, you're not seeing that.
Right.
Okay, but we can then take second reading on the policy and reg in April.
Right.
Thank you.
The regs aren't going to change anything you're already doing, or if you don't have to do it at all.
Right.
Yeah. And we're fine with transportation. I know that the transportation rules are,
If somebody doesn't want to go to this attendance school, what I call the homeschool or the geographic neighborhood school, they want to go someplace else, it's perfectly acceptable to have that transport as a condition of granting the request.
Okay, good.
Perfectly happens pretty much everywhere now.
And that's been our practice for many years. So thank you.
okay, so policy 206, between now and whenever our legislative meeting is in March, a couple weeks, March 14th, a couple weeks. I kind of update some of the language here to get some language proposed to 206, and we'll move forward then with that, since it should be a sentence or two, it looks like. So we'll move forward with policy 206 for first reading in March 14th. In the interim, Ms. Bruce will also work on the regulation for 206 to include our elementary school boundaries. And we will see regulation 206 at the March policy committee meeting, with the intent to have that go along with the second reading and adoption of 206 in April. Okay. So next, we have policy 707, use of school facilities. I don't know if you want to take this with 709, building security, but I believe the two are related. Seven oh seven is, looks like it's titled a little differently. Looks like it's access to district facilities. So what background do we have on this one?
I do not have anything specific. Ms. Bray, did this come from your office? I believe it was correcting some of the classifications. It was a relatively minor suggestion.
Yes,
It may
it
have
was,
been
and
Ms.
actually,
Lohoffer.
it was from Ms.
Yes.
Lohoffer, and we recently went over, I think there are some minor corrections.
Minor
and-
corrections.
And actually, it may have just been bringing up or updating the rate. There were some changes made to the rate schedule by the board, and it may just be bringing that up. I apologize, I wasn't at the previous meeting, I think when this was initially presented.
Yeah, I see on the second page of it on G2.
Correct.
The classification changing,
And it changes some of the clubs that are named community groups.
I suggest you take those out of your policy, and put them in graduates there. It's just, otherwise you're gonna update your policy every time somebody changes. And you've got,
Put all the classes in the right,
yeah,
Mr. Bruce?
no, keep the classes in policy, just put the,
The names of
Well,
the
it's a
groups.
classification.
any specific groups.
Right, that's what I'm saying.
Although it's another situation where it's not limited to. I think that really the major point, rather than the listing of the groups, is to make sure that we have the piece in there that a minimum of 75% of participants must reside within the district. I think that may be the key point, at least.
yeah. Keep that within the policy.
Okay.
Okay.
Just that any groups that we're giving access to specifically, we can keep in the regulations, so that it just takes one vote to modify it.
So are you removing the list of groups even in class 1,
Yes.
Mr. Bruce?
Yeah, the names of the groups should be,
Yep.
they should just be described.
Okay.
Uh, and there actually currently isn't a reg, so we'll create a reg with the fee schedule. In fact, there's supposed to be 10 things that go into the reg, according to this policy, so we need to have a reg that says all this stuff. But I think, my sense is we've already drafted one.
Probably. Okay, so, do we want to wait on 707 until we have the regs to go along with it, or do we want to move forward with 707 for first reading now? What's the feeling of the?
You'll have to remove all the names, that's all, class 1 and class 2.
I think we can move it forward without the regulation for now.
It's up to you. My history with this topic in other districts is going to take, you're going to talk about it.
Okay,
But it doesn't matter. You can always make it first reading. If you like, we get a reg and it's all written, then you move to second reading. If you don't like the reg, then you'll just put it on for a
first
second
reading.
reading. Right. So we'll take out the policy and let the policy for first reading and come back to the next policy meeting with the proposed reg.
Yep. Similar to 206. All right, so 707. March 14th, first reading. Okay.
I think in the administrative reg, you should write out what those groups are. Don't just have EDSC. I mean, we should say Upper Dublin Soccer Club, and then maybe in parentheses. It's this.
Yes. Great. Yes.
Yeah.
Mrs. Berry, may I ask, in regards to where it says a minimum of 75% of participants must reside within the district, those organizations, will they have to provide documentation for that, or how is that proven for?
They do provide documentation, and it is audited.
Yep, Ms. Lohan.
We'll put that in the reg.
Yep. Well, that's in the minimum 75 you can put in the regs or in policy?
Minimum 75 goes into the reg, how we audit that.
Wait,
I'm sorry.
you mean
Minimum,
policy?
the criteria, the 75% goes to the policy.
Right.
The criteria, how we audit it goes to the
Right.
regulation. Or the process,
Okay.
the mechanics.
Okay. So we're up to 709, building security, this policy. Next amendment.
And if I may, Madam
Please.
Chair, this is really being updated for the fact that we now have access badges as well as keys, and also delineating facility and community affairs manager and how the administrative duties are shared between director of facilities and that other position. So you'll notice a number of strikeouts and red lines, which Ms. Lohofer has, I'm sure, been involved with, and I talked with Mr. Gruneman as well, and where you see authorized card entry, access cards, and that. And I think Mr. Sivas.
To make sure that the policy is indeed accurate, the director of HR also has unlimited access. So we include that for informational purposes that would be accurate.
I think the school board does too. I think we have keys, we have unlimited access as well. I don't know if
No,
we
our
should-
doctors are limited to certain times.
No, we don't have 24.
Okay,
The positions that Mr. Sigafus was referring to are 24/7, 365,
okay.
or 366.
Does the AR discuss what the access period of time is? I mean, say for the school board, what access do we have?
The AR currently doesn't say that. The AR talks about Human Resources Department establishing procedures for issuing all personnel. Talks about visitors, but it doesn't drill down to that level. So you keep your access cards at the pleasure of Mr. Sigafus. You keep your access cards at the pleasure of Mr. Sigafus.
I don't think that's a bad policy.
I think our current practice is that you have typical school days, Monday through Friday, as early as 7 a.m. to 11 p.m. The 11 p.m. is because the custodians then activate the security system. So you do not have access to the security alarm. If you would be able to gain entry to the building, but you would set off the alarm and would not be able to deactivate it. So
we
I
don't
think
give
it's
you access
technically
to
like 6 or
I
7
think
a.m.
that's
to
good.
11 p.m.
But yeah, I think that's plenty of access, so.
You'd probably want to call us anyway.
Okay, so for unlimited access, we need to add director of HR, yeah. And then it looks like everything else was just changing operations to facilities and cleaning everything else about access cards and such. So we're not really using keys anymore.
Well, in some places, we do need to use keys
Right, yeah.
in certain areas, but you definitely need to have the access cards in the language.
Why some of the other changes is putting in about the superintendent shall probably AR to require that all visitors, including the registered volunteers, to display prominently photo identification badges whenever in district buildings, so.
Right. Just yes, since you already have the statement in the second paragraph, access to school buildings and facilities, superintendent or superintendent shall determine who's entitled to building keys. All that other stuff.
Regulation, yeah. All right, so everything past the second paragraph.
Everything all the way up to all of the rest of page 1, all of page 2, and then stop part of page 3 and stop at identification.
Right.
Mr. Is number 6 in the section where it says use of keys or access cards for unauthorized purposes will result in surrender of them. There needs to be any language that's a little bit more harsh, I guess you could say. If, let's say, for example, there was a student who was using it to gain access in some area in regards in terms of, or even for someone else for that matter,
Yeah, I-
beyond just the surrender.
Yeah, I completely agree, yes. Yeah, we're gonna, I'll add some disciplinary language, student, subject to discipline, employee, visitor, doesn't exactly be named, like reported to the police, all that stuff. Yeah. Thank you.
All right, so it looks like with the recommendation for 709, we're removing about half of the policy to place it in the regulation. So
And all the changes that were being made
we'll be to
to
the,
the part of the reg, so instead of move this to first read, you simply need to excise that first now.
exactly. So we can move this pretty simply to first reading now in, for March 14th at a legislative meeting. And then at our next policy meeting, we'll look at 709's new AR, or modified AR, to include the changes that we're discussing here. With again the plan then to have a second reading on policy 709 and have the modified accompanying 709 reg ready for our meeting in April, board meeting in April. So that'll fall on the same path as 206 and 707. No, it doesn't matter to me, I just. I mean, we can still, we can discuss it here and push back. Okay. So next is on the agenda is an item up for discussion, which is policy 108, textbook adoption. This is going to be I1 and I2 in the packet. Briefly discussing with Dr. Wheeler, Ava Morrison, our director of curriculum, has had an opportunity to review this and make some suggestions.
And one of the suggestions, of course, is to change the title and rather than referring to textbooks from now on, referring to curriculum materials, because we have such a variety.
And that's pretty much what this policy is doing, is not just limiting it to textbooks, but including curriculum materials. So our selection committees, is that similar to what we've had with the math review and now with the ELA?
Yes, exactly what's happening now with the ELA. They're going through a variety of options, exploring them, doing site visits, and honing that list down.
Then make a suggestion for title change and also how the grammar plays out in the entire policy, but to have it be called adoption of textbook and curriculum materials. Because if we're defining textbooks and curriculum materials, I do believe that the policy really in essence should cover both in the sense of the title. And then in terms of how it reads to be textbook and curriculum materials instead of other curriculum materials, I don't think the other is needed throughout the policy.
Right, either curriculum materials includes textbooks,
Yeah.
and it's just one term.
You're going to need to remove it or
Right, so we have to, just It makes sense.
I would suggest that we remove the textbook identification under definition and just go with curriculum materials because this language includes textbooks.
Okay,
So just strike that.
okay.
Does that make sense?
Something-
Or within, inside of the definition of curriculum materials, shall mean those resources including textbooks, and then we can always put a parentheses in there.
Well, we're moving the definition for sure then.
But I think it's good, it is good to have textbooks. I think the way we're talking about textbooks is, it's not just the physical book, but also the electronic format of books.
For textbooks, generally the primary source of information, of course, in the curriculum materials or just other sources.
No, it depends. For example, if we are moving toward more leveled reading, we're actually using trade books quite a bit. We're not abandoning textbooks, but I think a strict definition of textbook is certainly something that we're moving beyond as far as the materials that we're using as primary sources. And in social studies, primary source documents are increasingly important.
Then we don't need to even use the word textbooks.
That's what I would suggest, is the removal of that. And then maybe under definition, to add that electronic format, including textbooks, in parentheses, adding the part of electronic format, which is where it's defined in the paragraph above that.
Right.
That's right.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's going to be a matter of going through the policy here and looking at where it says textbooks to make sure we're
Yeah.
really just using curriculum materials.
Yeah, textbooks. Other than the definition of curriculum materials.
Right. Okay, so with the changes we discussed, removing the word textbooks, so curriculum materials includes textbooks, and including just within the definition of curriculum materials, when we're talking about textbooks, just making sure that that includes the electronic format textbooks. We should be good to put 108 for first reading on the March 14th legislative session. Agreed? Great. Okay. So next on our agenda is Regulation 610, purchases subject to bid.
And I would like to have Ms. Bray comment.
This AR, of course, has to do with purchasing, and it was drafted several years ago with the bid limits as well as the quotation limits that are required by the Commonwealth. And at that point in time, the school district, we had our threshold for obtaining quotes for, I'll call them team purchases, for curriculum materials, paper, pencil, whatever. The Commonwealth went to a process of updating or increasing the amounts each year for the bid level, $18,500 and $10,000 for the quotes. And that happens automatically, although we didn't go back and change the AR. The major change that that we're proposing in this, with a quotation level so low as $2,000, many things that need to be done for facilities, such as repairing a fence, perhaps doing some relatively minor plumbing, we're required to obtain 3 quotes. And when you have to obtain 3 quotes before you can award the work, many times you're delaying fixing a relatively simple thing until you can have 3 different contractors come onto the school district site, take a look, and then give you a quote. Then the second piece that happens, if a local vendor doesn't receive a job after 2 or 3 times, it's not the low quote, then they're reluctant, and you can understand it from a business point of view, to come out and give us another quote. So hence, sometimes our pool decreases, and it takes much longer to move through relatively minor purchases or corrections, repairs, that is ideal for a facility or an organization with so many facilities. So we were asking that we be able to change for facilities only, and this is where Mr. Roos, I think, will be very helpful to me, increasing that threshold to really basically the quotation threshold, and maintaining our $2,000 for everything else throughout the school district.
That threshold's 10,300, is that right?
Currently it is. Again, Mr. Bruce,
Or do you want to put the word current threshold in the
how
regulation
can
itself?
we get around
You
it?
want to put the actual threshold of the reg.
Okay.
Current threshold policy.
And every year then we would need to update that with, which is fine. I'll have to put it on my calendar.
Mhm.
Okay.
So, looking at this, I guess, with a fresh perspective, that there's probably too much currently in the policy already issued. Most of this.
I think this is the regulation.
This is the
I
administrative.
understand.
Okay.
I'm looking at
Oh, you're looking
policy
at the
online.
policy.
And the policy online, there's too much, it's not, I think there's probably a little too much in there. So, will it give us a shot, tweaking the policy
And updating the regs.
Updating, right.
Yeah, Justin O'Donoghue and I worked together on the regs, not all that long ago, but the policy, I'm not sure.
Policy was 2012.
2012. Okay. Just as a warning or a cautionary note or introduction, there are a number of policies within 600 that also need fresh eyes.
So Brenda, I'm confused. You said that you want to avoid bringing in as much as possible local
No.
guys to bid on something on $2,000? What was the way around that then? Because then they stop bidding.
Right, raising the threshold
Okay.
to $10,300 for facilities or for repairs to property.
Oh, just repairs.
And sometimes when we have a quasi-emergency or something that we really want to get fixed, again, with policy, unless I can really deem it an emergency, and you don't want to use that term too often, auditors don't like it, then it takes longer again to make that repair. Fences are things, taking down trees, pool issues we've had, and you need to get 3 vendors in for $2,000 or $3,000, and it becomes more and more difficult.
When did we set the $2,000 in here? Do we know how long it's been there?
The $2,000 really hasn't been there that long, maybe 2012. Before that, it was actually $500. So it was a big jump to go from $500 to $2,000.
Looking holistically at the 600s, there are a lot that need to be updated, and there's only one policy in the entire 600 that has a regulation. That tells me that
Oh,
they
we
haven't
need-
been looked at, and
Correct.
there's too much in policy, not enough regulation.
Well, now that we have pretty much addressed the media, or the social media and the computer use, should we switch our attention now to the 600s? That might be the way to go.
Yeah, I think the entire policy book probably needs fresh eyes, but if we're seeing right now with the 600s, I don't see there's any reason why we can't go with the 600 status.
Oh, so that'll be our next focus, okay, thank you.
And thank you.
I'm going to assume that on J1 and J3 as well, where we're listing textbooks, that those things would be changed again to curriculum materials. I'm also going to assume that we probably have many policies and administration regulations that would probably need to be updated with the same language if we're adopting policy 108 as well.
We'll check, look at, their textbooks is still a term of art in the school code, it does have different bidding requirements, so we may not be able to rid ourselves of that.
Okay.
For example, one of my favorites is still film strips is required to be in there and prepared transparencies and slides. School board-
Well, I
school
personally
board
like the flannel board materials as well.
Okay. All right,
Pretty
so,
outdated.
right, so so what we're gonna be doing is we're gonna bring back, 610. We'll look at we'll bring it back with the policy, at our March, policy meeting, so we can look at them together and yeah, update them, so hopefully we can move forward in April with the first reading on 610 policy. All right, so 610 is coming back. Let's see, March. Policy. Let's try to get through, hopefully 704 since Ms. Bray is with us. This is the school equipment disposal, since we do have members of the public actually at one of our meetings. So we will have time for community input a little bit, but if we can look at, I'm not sure the background here, but this is regulation 704.1, school equipment disposal.
I think we just wanted to take a look at it and see if that's procedure for administrative regulation that we want to continue to follow. We certainly in Upper Dublin are very good about every month putting out a listing and for board approval of obsolete items. But then sometimes how to dispose of the items once they're determined to be obsolete. And, you know, this sets forward how we want to handle them. Usually no one is interested in buying our obsolete equipment. I'm sure that's not shocking. But when someone does, we need to know if we want to have closed bids, what the dollar threshold is, and other such things. And again, this was prompted with conversation between the business office and our solicitor's office recently.
You don't currently have it, right?
Right.
So this would be very helpful.
So what's current practice? What do we do?
It's been informal, and it has only happened a couple of times during my tenure, and that we've had sealed bids come in, and have certain notices that people need to sign off as accepting the equipment or property as is.
So this is the new proposed reg, Ken?
Correct.
Yes.
Okay.
It needs an amount.
Right.
Yes.
Just to be consistent, appraisals cost money.
Yes, they
So
certainly do. They can cost a great deal of money, so.
It doesn't make any sense to have an appraisal for any property that's, you think, is worth less than what?
I will lease it. Well, 5,000 would be consistent with some other things that we have in policy. For example, we don't depreciate property until it's at a $5,000 threshold, so $5,000 would have some other current consistency within the 600s. All of that may be subject to change.
So the reg for now.
I propose those, yes, they're right.
Thank you.
We're not talking about real estate, obviously.
No.
So we just put, with the funds, just go to the general fund? Is that, I don't think it's,
Yes.
okay.
So Ken, do you know if districts will take advantage of eBay or Craigslist and they have these items? Or Brenda?
Go ahead.
I don't.
I do. Some districts have, Craigslist is usually not viewed favorably, eBay occasionally, and once upon a time, the IU even was providing a service.
Right.
But,
Nobody went to my website.
exactly.
I mean, gotta be a website people actually look
Right.
at. So fix and post, or no, fix and break.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this looks, since the name hasn't given any comments, I think we had 5,000, and we're ready to bring it forward in March here.
And
So-
it just gives clear direction instead of having a quasi-informal,
Right, yeah,
you know, and every time needing to go to the solicitor's office.
exactly. Okay, so this will be for, on March 14th, for approval. All right. After 3 already. I think this is a good spot to take a break for today, so we can open it up to community input. If that makes sense. So the rest of the items that are up for discussion, we will bring forward at our next policy meeting.
Do we have a deadline, Sarah, for the policy on the transgender, gender nonconforming?
But yeah,
This policy is not intended to, it's not for your consideration, it's basically not intended to go beyond what the law currently requires. You may choose to do that if you wish, but in default of a policy or reg on transgender and gender nonconforming students, this is what we're gonna do. So, no time. There is probably, if any of these things are time sensitive, it'd probably be done.
So this is the law.
Basically the law, correct. This is the law as we understand it today, and which continues to evolve.
right. It's been emerging over the last several years through the federal government's Office of Civil Rights.
It's been emerging since Caitlyn Jenner.
Right. It's
Recent
been,
decisions and whatever.
right, there was a recent decision out of Chicago with the Office of Civil Rights, which is the federal government's branch, that has been more specific now, and especially it affects federal dollars, that the feds won't necessarily be funding things if you're not going to be complying with the law, essentially.
Trillions of dollars that we get.
Yeah, I mean, we can try to discuss this a little bit if we want.
There's, out of the three that you haven't talked about, policy and is probably the most, that's the one that needs to get into place before the end of the year, pretty much.
Which one again?
Policy 800.
Oh, right, records.
You don't have a record. You want to get something in place before the summer, because summer tends to be when school districts clean out their archives.
Okay. All right, well,
And again, that's very true. We actually shred many documents, so
okay. So,
The others are
if we
important.
could.
right,
They're all important. They're just not.
all right, I guess for our March policy meeting, the first item under discussion, I'd like to put the transgender and gender nonconforming students, because that's something I think that we'll need to devote a little bit of time to discuss, and I think that we're at a point to do that. Looking at policy 800 right now, is it going to take more than 5 minutes, do we think? Because I know Dr. Wheeler needs to leave pretty soon, so she has another meeting going on. And obviously, she's an important member of the committee here.
I think it's going to take more than 5 minutes.
Okay, so,
We can lead off with that.
okay, so we
We
can
can
lead
begin
on
with that at the next
So that's
policy
what
meeting.
we'll start with 800 at the next policy meeting. So, okay. And so we know that we will be discussing 800, the new, right, so the other ones that we discussed today, but up for discussion, I think it's important to do 800, the transgender, gender nonconforming students, and then also doing the adult student boundaries regulation too. So I think that I would really like to get to those next week or next month. So at this point, we'll open up to community input. Community input's like other meetings where we have a 4-minute limitation, and after community input, everyone speaks that wants to speak, we will answer or address questions or comments. So if you'd like to speak, you can the podium over here. You come up and introduce yourself, tell us what part of the township you're from, and comment.
Hi, my name's Andy Allen, and yes, and I have a 10th grader at Upper Dublin High School. I was one of the people that was at the PTO meeting a week ago or so, and there weren't very many people there. I would say at least half were 12th grade students. Next year will be 12th grade students, and maybe 5 were 10th, 11th grade parents. And that's my concern, is that, one of my concerns is that not a lot of parents kind of have this on the radar. And I think there's going to be a lot of controversy when it actually goes into effect, because the parents haven't been directly communicated to about this. In other words, I remember seeing a while ago that we were supposed to get a survey, and parents and students were going to get a survey about the grade change. I don't think that happened. As it was explained to me, a decision was made not to do a survey, and that's okay. But then if it's part of a PTO meeting, which are generally not that well attended, I don't think it's on. It isn't communicated very well yet. That's my first point. And then, as Mr. Schultz was saying, he was willing to look into other neighboring schools and what they're doing. Now, after that PTO meeting, I just quickly looked, and I don't have all the facts, but I know that according to their website, Wissahickon, Abington, and Conestoga all have the whole grade GPA calculation. Lower Merion did change, but they changed in an interesting way. It was to a whole grade and a plus system. So to get an A, it was, and they seem to have cut out the A plus, but to get an A, it was 92 to 100. And then on that shoulder, it was 89 to 91 to get a B plus. And it just seemed to me that even doing it that way was a positive motivation. So, for example, if you have a student who's a B plus student, whether in a regular course or an honors course, and they make that extra effort to get an A, their transcript will look like an A minus, if you get my meaning. And Lower Merion made it slightly easier to get an A, but by making it 92 to 100, but at the same time, if you were just gaming the system, they said 89 to 91 was going to be a B plus. So it's just something I would like to consider. Oh, 1 minute left. And I think this really affects, I guess the timing is the other thing, because the 10th and 11th grade students are going to have a split transcript. You know, I find it really hard to believe that colleges, next year is a very big year for the 11th graders, and colleges are going to, in all the schools that they looked at in our area, they're going to say, well, wait a minute, we'll put Upper Dublin's aside and figure out their split system. And I think it's sort of unfair to that group of students. So I think some of the points at the PTO meeting were that this would be phased in starting with the 9th grade class, so that they would have 4 years of grades that are consistent. Because if you have 2 years of grades one way and 2 years of grades another way, then especially the 11th grade students next year, if they, let's say, have the same grades as this year, their GPA and grades would look lower. So it looked like they were putting less effort into, and psychologically you'd have to really work at it to see that the grades are split. So that's my comment. Sorry for going over. Thank you.
Jill Floyd from Pressure. Actually, I'm going to piggyback on that with the grading system. So I actually did look into neighboring high schools as well, and I have some specifics. I actually saw that Abington does a numeric system, which I think is actually the most fair. And I think if you're going to look into changing something, we would want to do something that is the most fair. Colleges take these grades and they put them into a system and it just messes everything up anyway. So an A minus, an A, an A plus, a B plus, whatever, you never know what it's going to turn out in the college system. But a 90 is a 90 is a 90. So I think it's better to have a numeric grade. Let the college determine what they want to make it instead of us. I think this can hurt students, like was said, who have had A's and they're the lower A student or the lower B student, and they've had 90s to 92s, and all of a sudden they're going to have a drop in their GPA, even though they're getting the same, they're doing the same amount of work, and actually they may be doing better. They may go from a 90 to a 92, but it'll make it look like they're doing worse, and I don't think that's fair. So I think if you're going to look at this, I think you should definitely research what's going on in the neighboring districts. And I think that the numeric system, since we're going to be doing numeric averages at the end anyway, which is the best way to do it, and I like that, I think we should just make that all quarters numeric grades. And this will also help with the transition if you have kids that are going from one grading system to another. It won't look like an A to an A minus, instead it'll look like an A to a 90. And that would be possibly an A to a college. So going from a grade to a number, I think makes it more fair if you're going to do a change. And that's it. So thank you, and I hope that you consider all of this since you're discussing a policy change. I would hope that we take all of this into consideration before making a jump to something that could affect some students. Thank you.
All right, do you have any other community input? Seeing none, we'll close community input. One of the concerns, of course, is the communication piece, is that we need to make sure that everyone is made well aware of what the change we're considering. I think that Mr. Schultz outlined a little bit what his efforts have been so far to get it to where, to get here to the policy committee. From here, some of the things that we do is, like I said, we're bringing it back to the committee for another month, next month in March. And once, if we make a determination that we're going to recommend a change, then it'll go up to the legislative session for the school board. And because it's a policy change, it would have 2 separate readings. So we have an opportunity of a decent amount of time still left so people can have input on this change. And I think it's something that we could include in an email. The high school sends out weekly emails, I believe. We have a lovely new website. I'm sure we could include something on that website so people are well informed, and if they would like to give us feedback, they can. Regarding a lot of these questions, I think, are specifically for administration, maybe for Mr. Schultz specifically. Is there anything that you would like to weigh in on that, Dr. Miller?
No, again, I think Mr. Schultz and the guidance department spent a great deal of time investigating and developing these criteria. We certainly can ask him to return to the policy committee, or if you'd like to suggest that this go back to the education committee where it was presented and discussed in depth. That is a televised board committee meeting as well. We could do that, but I think having them garner this information, I'll be happy to provide this feedback to them and have them come back to the next policy committee, and they can address the questions that were raised.
Anybody else would like to chime in? Okay. If not, we will be adjourned. We have our next policy committee meeting is on March 28th at 1:30 in the afternoon at the high school, probably in the Cardinal Room, but if not, we'll find a different location, we'll post that. That's it. We'll see you next month. Thanks.